Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers, and I am with RTI International's Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. Today's webinar is the first webinar in our ASCLD Emerging Issues Employee Wellness webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled NIJ ASCLD Gap Assessment of Stress, Vicarious Trauma, and Resiliency for Forensic Science Professionals. Before we do get started, just our quick disclaimer: the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. We have a large panel that is on for today's webinar, and I would like to first give the microphone over to Ms. Erin Forey. She has served on the ASCLD Board of Directors since 2016 and is the current ASCLD President-elect. She holds a certificate in laboratory management with an emphasis in forensic science laboratory management from the University of California, Davis Extension. Erin?
Hi, Josh. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to everyone for being here today from all over the globe to tune in for our webinar. Stress, wellness, resilience, vicarious trauma have all been important topics to ASCLD. In fact, we had a block set aside for our symposium this year about this topic. Unfortunately, due to COVID, that had to be canceled. But on the bright side, we have the support of RTI International and FDCOE to host these webinars that we can bring to the globe. And right now, with all of the upheaval we have in both our personal and professional lives, the stress and vicarious trauma and employee wellness topics seem to be particularly relevant. All the while, we are still working as first responders and doing our day jobs as forensic science professionals, and we're still dealing with the typical stressors that we have in our profession with everything else that is happened now. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all again for being here, for FDCOE for supporting us, and to all of the presenters today. And I'll give that back to you, Josh. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Erin. We're going to introduce a very special presenter that we have today, Dr. Jonathan McGrath. He currently serves as Senior Policy Analyst with the Department of Justice's National Institute of Justice, the Office of Investigative and Forensic Sciences in Washington, D.C. Jonathan?
Thank you, Josh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, I will be sharing my screen and slides momentarily. All right, Josh, if you could please confirm that you see my slides.
Yes, sir. Your screen looks great.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you to RTI and the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. And I also want to thank ASCLD, the American Society of Crime Lab Directors, first of all, for accepting our proposal to speak at the symposium this year. Unfortunately, due to the cancellation, we weren't able to meet with everyone in person to provide this information, but I'm certainly glad that we have the opportunity to provide this information in a virtual environment. So I do want to thank ASCLD. Going back to several activities NIJ has been involved with the past few years, I'll go over some of those activities as well as resources that we've been developing to describe NIJ's role in this area of addressing stress, trauma, and resiliency for the forensic science workforce. But again, my name is Jonathan McGrath. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at NIJ, and I operate under the Office of Investigative and Forensic Sciences. And I have my own DOJ disclaimer that my opinions are my own and not those of DOJ or NIJ. So NIJ, most of you are familiar with our office. We're the National Institute of Justice, and we're the research, development, and evaluation agency of DOJ, dedicated to improving knowledge and understanding of crime and justice issues through science. So to give everybody a little bit of background, we developed a needs assessment over the last several years that culminated in a report to Congress this past December. It was published and is available publicly online. It's a needs assessment of forensic laboratories and medical examiner coroner offices. And early on in the formation of this study, NIJ and DOJ held a series of listening sessions with the stakeholder community, including representatives from ASCLD. So that listening session with ASCLD representatives occurred in late 2017 and was followed on. The topic of stress and vicarious trauma came up during that session It also was followed by the 2018 ASCLD Symposium, where Dr. Levin and a panel covered some of these topics in detail. And after that 2018 symposium, ASCLD formed a working group to investigate these issues further. So NIJ and the FTCOE both participated on this working group with several other stakeholders from the community. And a lot of the discussions over the last several years contributed to the information that is in this needs assessment report. So I encourage the audience to take a look at this report. And in the personnel selection section includes a deep dive discussion on health and wellness for the forensic workforce. And one of the key findings in the report are that efforts are needed to maintain a resilient forensic workforce, including the development of resources to address forensic workforce stress and vicarious trauma associated with the working environment. The report stated that one of the challenges is increasing workloads and also backlogs and the stressful work environments that take a toll on the forensic workforce. While resources are available to law enforcement and other industries to address stress and vicarious trauma, few tools have been developed specifically for the forensic personnel. Now, the needs assessment also noted the importance of supporting health and wellness of laboratory staff who typically work in demanding, stressful environments. The report also noted that although traditional first responders' exposure to trauma and its effects are widely recognized, the significant trauma exposure of forensic professionals is just beginning to be acknowledged. The report noted that the forensic workforce routinely operates in a high-stress occupational environment, and disciplines such as crime scene unit personnel, forensic nurses, medical legal death investigation professionals, laboratory analysts, and digital examiners all have significant exposure to trauma. Forensic science practitioners and death investigators respond to violent crimes, death scenes, including homicides, sexual assaults, child and infant fatalities, and line-of-duty deaths. The workforce faces large workloads, persistent backlogs, and the mandate that quality results be provided in a timely manner while maintaining that scientific rigor. And while this information was being developed over the last few years, NIJ has demonstrated interest in this area by funding an earlier study developed by Michigan State University researchers. It was funded in 2011 and culminated in a technical report that's available online that we'll hear a little bit more about in the next presentation. And it was, you can find some of that information posted to NIJ.gov's website on conditions affecting forensic scientists' workplace productivity and occupational stress. And so I've been working closely with the FTCOE to put out products and resources since we started these discussions with the needs assessment. And we initiated this activity in 2018 to develop webinars, podcasts, and these resources to provide this information that's relevant to forensic practitioners at lab, field, and management levels for both crime labs and medical examiner corner offices. The additional resources that you can find at this link also include ASCLD reports on this topic, including ASCLD resources on management, detection, and mitigation of stress, vicarious trauma, and burnout in forensic practitioners. NIJ has also been working closely with our partners at the Office of Justice Programs to identify resources and funding opportunities, including research opportunities to address these needs. The OJP Office for Victims of Crime Vicarious Trauma Toolkit serves as a framework as one of those resources. And the gap assessment study that is sponsored by NIJ will discuss this in a little bit more detail, as it was the OVC Vicarious Trauma Toolkit and its organizational readiness guides were adapted into for forensic workforce professionals. And these organizational readiness guides were initially established for law enforcement, fire, EMS, and victim service communities. OVC also this past year has initiated a vicarious trauma response initiative, which is a national scope training and technical assistance provider. So I encourage everyone in the audience to keep an eye on the OVC announcements as this project moves forward. You can also find online the NIJ Strategic Research Plan related to safety, health, and wellness. Back in 2019, we made 2 awards under topic number 3 for the solicitation on research and evaluation in safety, health, and wellness in the criminal justice system. This topic number 3 was advancing resiliency for the forensic workforce and understanding the impact and management of stress, burnout, and vicarious trauma. The one award that was made was understanding work-related stress amongst medical legal death investigators, which is a national survey and mixed methods impact study that was awarded to RTI, and it will partner with the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators, or ABMDI. The goal of this project is to inform interventions and preventative training for medical legal death investigators to reduce and alleviate work-related stressors and to improve organizational outcomes such as turnover, job performance, and also personal well-being. A second award was made under this program which is a study of trauma and resiliency among forensic examiners investigating child pornography. This award was made to the University of New Hampshire, which will partner with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Training and Technical Assistance Program. The goal of this project is to inform criminal justice efforts to advance resiliency and promote wellness for forensic examiners, whose job it is to search for and classify large quantities of child pornography images stored in digital media. The Office for Community-Oriented Policing Services, or COPS, also provided this report to Congress based on their Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act program. This report came out in the last couple of years, and Recommendation 21 encouraged departments to make support available to non-sworn employees on the same terms as their sworn colleagues whenever possible. The report noted that civilian staff, most often mentioned as warranting enhanced services, were dispatch, forensic, and crime scene investigation staff. It was argued that they engage in the same incidents and cause stress for officers, just in a different capacity. Simply making wellness programs available to these civilian staff members may benefit their personal wellness as well as overall agency operational readiness. This program also offers funding opportunities, and the most recent one closed in April of this year, and it was focused on topic areas such as peer support implementation projects and also coordination of assistance. And in 2019, the program provided funding opportunities for improved delivery and access to mental health and wellness services, including training and technical assistance, demonstration projects, and implementation of promising practices and recommendations that were specified in this COPS report. So please keep an eye on opportunities in the future, and there's certainly a wealth of information that you can take back to your own jurisdictions and agencies to help develop programs specific to forensic professionals. And please keep an eye out for additional information beyond just the scope of this gap assessment study that you're hearing about, because I believe NIJ has significant interest in this area and would like to keep the momentum moving forward. So I thank you for joining us today. I look forward to the rest of the analysis that will be discussed. And if you would like to reach out to me, my email address is provided on the slide, or you can reach out to the FTCOE staff as well. Thanks, Josh, and I'll stop sharing my slides and turn it back over to you.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. We are going to move into our presentation today, an introduction of our three presenters and subject matter experts that we have. Our first presenter will be Dr. Andrew Levin, who is board certified in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry and holds the rank of Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Columbia University. Our second presenter is Ms. Heidi Putney. She holds a master's degree in clinical psychology from Central Michigan University and is a fifth-year doctoral student. Our third presenter, and who will be running today's slides today, will be Ms. Danielle Crimmins. She's a research assistant at the National Institute of Justice and a doctoral at Purdue University in the Computer and Information Technology Department with a concentration in digital forensics. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand the platform over to drive the slides to Ms. Danielle Crimmins. And I would like to hand the microphone over to our first presenter of the day, Dr. Andrew Levin. Dr. Levin?
Thank you. Just make sure you can hear me okay, Josh. Is I coming through okay?
Yes, sir. Your audio sounds great, and the slides are there for you to begin.
Very good. Okay. So first, I would also like to, thank NIJ and ASCLD for developing this project, particularly under Jonathan's leadership and the leadership of the ASCLD Trauma Stress Work Group. Just a little bit of background. I am a forensic psychiatrist, and over a number of years, I have studied vicarious trauma in attorneys, actually, criminal attorneys and attorneys working in the family courts and immigration courts. So it was a wonderful opportunity when I was invited to the ASCLD forum in 2018 to kick off a understanding and investigation of this issue. I'd also like to thank Heidi Putney and Danielle Crimmins, who have really been instrumental in terms of putting together the survey that we used and analyzing the data and working together with Jonathan and myself to develop a report. So let's go on to the next slide. The disclaimer is, of course, none of the opinions or points of view expressed are those of anyone else except the authors. They do not reflect the positions of the Department of Justice or Columbia University. There are no commercial products. And again, as I said, the sponsors of this are ASCLD, the Stress and Trauma Work Group, as well as the National Institute of Justice. Go to the next slide. Good. By now, I think that many of you are familiar with these concepts. They have really come to the fore over the last decade. But there are some variations on what we think of as secondary trauma or vicarious trauma or burnout. Secondary traumatic stress, which was really also called compassion fatigue, a term that many people may know of, by Charles Figley, himself a Vietnam veteran and a mental health professional. He was focused on first responders, EMS, police, emergency workers, and the stress of working in traumatic situations or with victims of trauma. McCann and Perlman, on the other hand, were psychotherapists, and they explored this from a slightly different angle, and they labeled it vicarious trauma, and this really related to the work in therapy over long periods of time, usually with adult trauma survivors. So that's a very different kind of experience than the EMS or first responder experience. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the term burnout. It was initially actually coined in the late 70s by Maslach. It usually refers to work overload, fatigue, and resulting attrition, as opposed to secondary traumatic stress, which has this element of exposure to traumatic material vicariously or through another. And interestingly, as an aside, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition of the American Psychiatric Association, which came out in 2013, defined traumatic material exposure in the workplace as a qualifying stressor for PTSD, for post-traumatic stress disorder. So technically, we can call these responses post-traumatic stress disorder, although I think we still call them secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. So let's go on. What are the elements? Well, much like post-traumatic stress disorder, we think of vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, as being characterized by intrusive thoughts about the material that you've been exposed to, avoidance of the reminders of that material, withdrawal from others, particularly this phenomena that people say, no one understands what I do or what I've seen, negative perceptions about yourself or about the world or others, and often disturbed sleep, sometimes disturbed by nightmares or images related to the material. The vicarious trauma concept expanded this somewhat in terms of the notion of how exposure to trauma changes people's sense of identity, how it changes their worldview, how it may change their sense of spirituality. If these terrible things can happen in the world, how can there be a God? Are people really good? These are the kinds of questions that people often ask themselves after they've worked with a lot of traumatic material, in particular seen the results of interpersonal violence and mistreatment. And of course, issues of self-esteem come up in terms of confronted with this difficult material. People often feel quite powerless. What can I do? What have I done? I'm really not a good therapist. I'm not a good professional because this tidal wave of material is too much for me to handle. Similarly, exposure to this kind of material often gives people a sense of decreased safety. Am I safe in the community? Are my children safe? Can I control what happens to them? Burnout, on the other hand, as I say, is related often, is more towards workload and increasing demands. And the responses there we see are more fatigue, cynicism, people are less effective. And of course, that can lead to absenteeism and ultimately attrition, which is something that, all professionals, employers of professionals are always very concerned about because we value the people that we work with. And attrition is very stressful. In terms of groups studied, a number of groups have been studied for vicarious trauma, as I said, first responders, law enforcement, attorneys, judges, and juries, but there have been very few studies of forensic professionals. Let's go on. What are some of the risk factors? Well, certainly the frequency and intensity of exposure to the material, interaction with victims and families, the graphic nature of material, particularly intentional cruelty, victim type, when the victims involve children, or may be similar to the professional working on the material, typically, say, a young woman interacting with material related to rape or sexual assault. But there are other identifications as well. Another important risk factor is context. What does the organization do in terms of helping to identify this stress, to support the workers, to train them, to deal with work overload? And lastly, we think about individual factors, a personal history of trauma or other psychological stress, or gender. There seems to be pretty good evidence that women may be somewhat more vulnerable to this. So that's another consideration in understanding what are the risks for developing vicarious trauma. Go on. Next slide, please. Good. There's a large study, the largest study out there by Holt, done in 2016 of almost 900 forensic professionals. They gathered information about their demographics and work environment. They looked at their work stress, their job satisfaction, some of their interpersonal interactions. They looked at secondary trauma and burnout symptoms in particular, and they looked at coping mechanisms. This is a large study. We could spend all day on it, but I'm just going to try to summarize the results in the next slide. They found what you would imagine, that high stress plus low job satisfaction made people more vulnerable to increasing more symptoms of secondary or vicarious trauma. They found in terms of working, in terms of coping strategies, that people would work harder at home and bring their work home. They might avoid thinking about the material, which can be a positive strategy if not overused. They might isolate themselves. Some people used more alcohol, although they did not find excessive alcohol use. People used family and friends as supports. They sought out spiritual support, community activities, and only a very small percentage of people sought out professional help. And that's really been the experience across the board with vicarious trauma, that this is not an illness or a disorder, but a small group of people may be pushed into more serious symptoms and responses. Go ahead. Crime scene investigators, as you would imagine, that's a stressful role. They encounter more violent death than police officers, of course, because they come to every scene. A study by Adderley in 2012 found that crime scene investigators experienced a 50 beat per minute increase in their heart rates at crime scenes. And of course, this reflects adrenergic or, epinephrine, adrenaline, as I think it's popularly known, adrenaline increases. And then the Israeli police forensic technicians, a lot of interesting studies of Israeli first responders, particularly those who have to pick up body parts for religious reasons. Let's go on to the next slide. Medical examiners have also been studied, and as you would imagine, dealing with infant deaths and then also interacting with families. Before I did the study, I'm not sure if I understood that medical examiners interact quite a bit with families. You all know this if that's what you do for a living, in terms of notifying and giving families information about the cause of death. That can be quite stressful. And they found that cognitions, thoughts of alienation, low distress tolerance, and negative self-evaluation were the strongest predictors of PTSD and depressive symptoms or vicarious trauma symptoms. Go ahead. Digital investigators, as was noted by Jonathan, we know that there's been a marked increase in digital forensic material, and the number of trained professionals to work on this material has not increased proportionally. They have very high caseloads. And there are a lot of demands placed on them both by federal and state authorities to work on these materials. Time spent with the material seems to correlate with increases in secondary trauma and cynicism and increased thoughts of leaving the job. And increased exposure to crimes against children correlated with secondary trauma, and increased coping was mediated by secondary trauma. And women used more coping skills than males, which I think goes along with our notion that women may be more comfortable connecting and sharing, and that's one of the most important coping skills. You go right ahead. So based on this background and in discussions with forensic scientists at ASCLD and NIJ, we developed four central research questions. The first question was, do field-based scientists report more secondary trauma, burnout, and less compassionate job satisfaction than lab-based scientists or managers? So we thought of these three different groups. how are these, how are secondary trauma, burnout, and job satisfaction, how does it vary across forensic specialties and job responsibilities? What percentage of employees reported that they believed their facility had procedures and policies in place to promote employee health and wellness? And did this vary between the three major groups? And lastly, was there any relationship between burnout, secondary trauma, and job satisfaction and scientists' perceptions of their facility and what their facility was doing to promote employee health and wellness? So at this point, I'll turn it over to Danielle, who will tell us about the methodologies that we used. And if there's, then Heidi will discuss the data itself. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So this survey was in collaboration with ASCLD. During the summer of 2019, we distributed an online anonymous survey to forensic laboratories and medical examiners in the United States. The survey included basic demographic questions, as well as questions regarding to individual job responsibilities, and also 2 subscales. Job responsibilities refer to questions such as the amount of overtime an individual works, if participants engage in testifying, how often participants are deployed from their office, and what type of work individuals engage in, such as with victims, attending a crime scene, or working with sexual assault kits. And as Andrew just alluded to with the research questions, we also asked participants to self-report their job description, and there were 3 choices, and the individuals could only select one. So that was field-based, lab-based, or a supervisor or manager role. There were also 2 subscales. The first subscale was the Vicarious Trauma Organizational Readiness Guide, which was developed in 2019 by Northeastern University and funded by the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime, as Jonathan mentioned during his presentation. And the VT org includes 5 subscales. First, leadership and mission. Second, management and supervision. Third, employee empowerment and work environment. Fourth, training and professional development. And finally, employee health and wellness. The next subscale was the Professional Quality of Life Survey, which is a self-report instrument, which included 3 subscales such as secondary trauma, burnout, and compassion satisfaction. Our survey was solicited to 1,800 individuals. We had a response rate of approximately 28% for a final sample size of 519. The majority of the sample was female, white, and in a married or common law relationship. There were 46% of individuals had a master's degree, and with regards to the self-report question on their on their job description, the majority at 68% were lab-based individuals, followed by 22% of managers or supervisors, and then 10% indicated they were field-based. And then with regards to some of their job responsibilities, the majority reported they do not work with victims, victim families, or victim services. And now I will hand it over to Heidi Putney, who will discuss the results for the research question. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone. So our first question really is the main question in this study is, are the field-based scientists reporting more secondary trauma than the lab-based scientists and the supervisors and managers? And what we found was the field-based scientists did report significantly more secondary trauma than lab-based scientists. So this was in line with our initial hypotheses. However, I want to kind of direct your eyes to the means here. On this particular scale, we're looking at a 0, which is indicating no secondary trauma, all the way up to a 100, which is indicating experiencing secondary trauma very regularly. So although the means are significantly different, they are both in the sometimes range. So this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of the presentation, that although we can target some specific groups with maybe more resources, I think a big take home is that we are seeing some secondary trauma in all of the scientists. And again, there was no statistically significant difference in secondary trauma between the lab-based scientists and their managers and supervisors. However, they were still in the sometimes range. So we're really talking about across the board in all different types of facilities and all different types of jobs that the majority of people are reporting that they are sometimes experiencing this secondary trauma. We did not find any differences between these three groups in burnout or job satisfaction. And largely that was because pretty much everyone was reporting that they were sometimes experiencing burnout and sometimes experiencing job satisfaction. Go ahead. So we really wanted to get a little bit more fine-grained. When we initially went to each facility, we had great discussions with each of the labs about all the different types of disciplines that were working within the facilities. Ultimately, we ended up having 30 different disciplines that people could choose from, and we wanted to see if there were any differences between the disciplines within forensic labs. So, interestingly, the means for all the disciplines were all in that sometimes range. So we weren't seeing huge differences between the disciplines. Although they were still in the sometimes range, we just wanted to talk about a little bit of an interesting finding that one of the groups that popped up a little higher than the rest was the CSI group. This was a group that we had hypothesized to potentially experience more secondary trauma than other disciplines. However, a group that was a little surprising to us at first was the photographers. This is both in the lab and outside of the lab. They were reporting higher scores than the other disciplines as well. So we'd be very interested in the listeners' hypotheses on this. It seemed, once we found this finding, it did seem intuitive that the photographers would be endorsing slightly higher rates of secondary trauma. But again, a really big take home here is that all the disciplines were in this sometimes range. And so when we're thinking about resources, we're probably looking to target entire facilities rather than individual disciplines. Go ahead. Very similarly, all the disciplines were reporting some burnout, so some of that workplace stress. We wanted just to note here, another interesting finding that we hadn't expected in the beginning was that photographers again popped up as one of the highest means in this area of burnout, reporting the highest scores of burnout. And so we did not have the capacity to do that in this study, but it may be an area of future interest and future research that we should maybe target that group a little closer and try to nail down what's going on in that discipline and in that profession that could be contributing to some of that secondary trauma and stress. Go ahead. And then some good news, even though people were reporting stress and some secondary trauma, they were also reporting that they liked their jobs. So, which is pretty typical. They all of the disciplines were in the sometimes range again here for job satisfaction. So saying sometimes they like their job, sometimes they don't. Interestingly, one of the groups that popped out as the highest was latent print analysts. This is not a discipline we were very familiar with, the three researchers. So this is another area we'd be very interested in the listeners' hypotheses as to what could be contributing to maybe some higher job satisfaction in this particular discipline, because it's possible if we can identify what is successful in that profession, in that discipline, we could maybe try to consider incorporating some of those aspects to other disciplines to try to improve their work experience. But yeah, that was a very interesting finding for us. Go ahead. We also wanted to look at the perception of the facilities. So the lab-based scientists and the field-based scientists did not have a significant difference in how they felt the facility was promoting employee health and wellness. Here, when you're looking at the means, you're going to see a different scale. So this is from a 1, suggesting that the scientists believe their facility is doing nothing to promote employee health and wellness, all the way up to a 5, which is suggesting that the facility is always promoting employee health and wellness. So you're seeing some middle ground here of where people are reporting that their facilities are addressing wellness in some areas and maybe not as well in others. Something that was interesting to us was we did find a significant difference between the lab-based scientists and their managers. So the managers were more critical in their beliefs of the facility. So the lab-based scientists believed that the facilities were more adequately addressing wellness than the managers. This could be a function of those managers kind of being in that middle ground between the politics of the facility as well as those who are actually completing some of that work. So we're interested in that. That is probably another area of study as well. I do want to just note, though, that these means all still fall in this sometimes range. So it was a little less helpful for us than we were hoping. So we wanted to get a little bit more fine-grained in this as well. Go ahead, Danielle. So what we did is we zoomed out one of those 5 subscales from the VT org, and that was the subscale that was called Employee Health and Wellness. It had 10 questions on it that employees could identify whether or not they thought that their facility was addressing those areas in employee health and wellness. They could range from things like onboarding practices, such as asking new applicants what their own coping skills are for trauma, all the way to actual physical wellness, such as offering yoga classes or an EAP, all of these sorts of interventions for employee health and wellness. And concerningly, what we found was that up to 1/4 to 1/2 of employees reported the belief that their facility never or rarely had procedures or policies in place to promote employee health or wellness. This was really interesting to us because we had gone from facility to facility asking about what their interventions were to detail these areas. And we actually had a lot of response from the facilities. And so we actually think this might be an issue in marketing, that the employees, this is about perception, they're unaware of the interventions that are available to them at their facilities. So if facilities are kind of considering how can we not only add interventions, but make sure they're attended, that marketing piece is going to be important, because if you have interventions that people are not aware of, it's very similar to not having them at all. So there was no difference across the 3 groups here. This was employee-wide, that we had about 1/2 of employees, up to 1/2 of employees on some of these things, believing that their facility did not address these areas. So could be a marketing issue. Go ahead. And then finally, something that, again, was really great news for the study, we correlated the VT org and the ProQual and found that they were significantly related. And so the reason why this is really great news is because this shows that you address secondary trauma, burnout, and job satisfaction, you can improve perceptions of the facility. So resources are limited, and this graph, we think, is some evidence to put forward that if you're trying to consider, should we be putting resources towards the stress of our employees, toward improving how they like their jobs, this supports that by engaging in those efforts, you can improve the employee perception of the facility in lots of areas, including training, leadership, in addition to employee health and wellness. So this was a really great finding. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Levin.
Okay, thanks. You can hear me okay? Thank you to Danielle and Heidi for, as I said, the really hard work to putting together our survey and analyzing it and their presentation here. So I'm going to try to summarize the conclusions from what we've learned and think about what directions we might be taking. So as we said, field-based personnel do report more secondary trauma than lab-based personnel, and it suggests that that group management and facilities should be particularly sensitive to their stresses, although, as Heidi aptly pointed out, we shouldn't be neglecting any group because everyone is experiencing this to some extent. There was a relatively equal distribution between forensic specialties of reports of secondary trauma, but interesting, people who were crime scene investigators, which we predicted by the previous literature, were higher, and photographic evidence people were higher. When we talked to some of the facilities, in a post hoc way about this finding, people suggested that there was a lot of exposure. Not a pun, but that these professionals really dealt with a lot of material over short periods of time and went to every crime scene and took photographs across the whole range. So they may have a particularly high dose of material to deal with. Want to go on? Yes. We didn't. Hold on. Where are we? There weren't any differences between lab-based, field-based, and managers on burnout and compassion satisfaction, job satisfaction, and burnout was relatively equal. But again, the photographic people popped out, and again, this suggests maybe a need for study about what elements may be related particularly to that specialty and whether it might apply to other specialties. And compassion satisfaction, job satisfaction was also quite relatively equal between forensic specialties. But the latent print group was a little higher. Again, in sort of post-hoc discussions, there was some suggestion that this group comes to answers relatively quickly, that they play an important role in presentations related to what's going on in the courtroom or work directly with the district attorneys. And this may give them some more satisfaction in terms of they've, uncovered a link between the prints that may assist the prosecution. So let's go on. Again, we have this conclusion that between 25 and 50% of forensic professionals felt their facility was doing little to promote wellness. Now, of course, the wellness area had 10 sub areas that we haven't brought out in this presentation. But so it's interesting, some facilities who said they had yoga, they scored well in this area, but they didn't have other kinds of services, and they didn't score as well. So, this could be a guide. The use of this instrument could be a good guide to finding out where the weaknesses and strengths are of a facility in addressing these issues. And then I think that, the other finding that we thought was quite important was that perceived services and presumably the actual services themselves correlate in the expected directions with secondary trauma and burnout. So greater perception of services correlated with less secondary trauma and burnout and more job satisfaction. And that's really what we're hoping, and it really indicates that there is a meaningful impact on employee wellness in terms of providing these kinds of services. So I believe that's our last slide, and here are our references in tiny print, and I think we're ready for questions in terms of going forward.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Levin. We do have a question that just came in while you were presenting your last few slides, asking, are there any findings for differences on BO and CS related to cultural differences or gender?
I would start by saying that I don't believe that we asked for cultural identifications, so we weren't able to answer that question. We did ask about gender. And Heidi, I believe that there was not a finding for gender. Is that right?
So actually, this is an area that we're going to explore more in the publication. We plan to do a regression in which we can try to see what some of these demographic factors do in relation to secondary trauma, try to see if any of these factors are protective or perhaps contributing to more. So unfortunately for this project, we're unable to answer that yet, but I'd say stay tuned for that publication, because hopefully we'll be able to look at in that regression what some of those characteristics, how they're contributing to secondary trauma, burnout, and job satisfaction.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
While we're waiting on other questions to come in, I just want to make mention that we are recording today's webinar and we will be turning it around into our archival version. We also have Jonathan McGrath's presentation slides that are on the main page where you entered today's. You will have access to be able to download those directly after today's event. And then we also have the next two webinars currently up on your screen that will be next Thursday, the 18th, and next Thursday, the 25th, rounding out our ASCLD Emerging Issues Employee Wellness Series. So the next question that came in, Dr. Levin, I'll pose to you and again let you disseminate out to the group. It's a statement that you can probably elaborate on a little further. For the presenters and researchers, one thing you can look at in your follow-up study is the type of calls based on the Uniform Crime Classification Codes, a field versus lab person experience.
Thank you for that question. I have to admit that I'm not that familiar with the codes themselves, but it sounds like they would describe actually the reason the individual had to go into the field and what actually happened when they were in the field. And that's an excellent question because that would be sounds like a more fine-grained way to look at the level of trauma exposure. So that's a useful observation. Thank you.
Next question we have comes from Rob asking, are there any tools for doing a rapid assessment of one's facility, such as scorecards, surveys, etc.?
I don't know if Jonathan is on. My impression is that the development of the VT org is that it does present a rapid assessment. It's an instrument that can be completed by individuals in about 20 minutes, and that might be quite useful. And the ProQual itself is an instrument that people can take themselves, can score themselves to rate their own trauma. They don't have to share it with anyone. Jonathan, do you have any other thoughts about that, or?
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. The OVC, the Officer for Victims of Crime Vicarious Trauma Toolkit, if you go to their website and just Google OVC VTT, you should pop right up. If you find the links that discuss the VT orgs or the VT organizational readiness guides, like I mentioned earlier, OVC developed those guides specifically for four main groups of audiences, which were law enforcement, EMS, fire, and victim services. And I think they tailored each of the four to fit in with the kind of organizational or agency, kind of just the way that the organizations run in those four industries, if you will. And the one that's probably closest to the forensic science community is the law enforcement VT org. And again, it's built for some facilities to do that self-assessment. So you can download that PDF file, you can go through that together with your colleagues or individually. And we hope to come up with the modified version of this VT org for forensic science professionals as an outcome from this work. So that's something that the team is still working on, but I believe we'd like to make that resource available so we can tune it specifically for the forensic science workforce.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, we did modify it in order to distribute it in this survey, and we're working on how we can make that available. The next question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Levin. Next question comes in from Ray Wickenheiser asking, based on these results, what do you feel are the most effective things a crime lab can do to assist staff?
Well, first, thank you, Ray, for tuning in and asking this interesting question. You know, unfortunately, the study wasn't designed to look at what was most effective. So we have to really fall back on the literature that's out there. And one of the strongest findings is that mindfulness actually is very helpful in reducing stress, as well as facilitating peer interactions, and maybe peer mentors is another area that has shown some effectiveness. But given that there are a whole range of interventions, each facility has to find what might work best for them. But so the literature informs us somewhat, but this is an understudied area. Any other thoughts, Heidi or Danielle, about that?
No, I agree. I think that that will be the next area. We were really trying to look and see if the interventions were needed. I think our study supports that those resources would be well spent targeting stress and secondary trauma. And kind of the next stage will then be trying to figure out which of those interventions are most effective.
Good. I think we're up to the next question.
All right. Next question is, were there any particular wellness offerings that different places have that seem to significantly help with secondary trauma, burnout, or coping strategies?
Again, I'm not sure if we were, structured the data in a way to answer that question. And it's somewhat like Ray's question in the sense that we don't know exactly what works well except from the literature. And Heidi, I don't think that our VT.org results really shed much more light on that question. Is that right?
They do not. I can tell you, because we didn't have it in this particular PowerPoint, there's a range from facilities are already using peer programming. They are using yoga programming, mindfulness programming. Right now, there's quite a bit of webinar usage. There are some interventions that include things like social hours. So there are quite a few interventions happening out there, but I think it's too early to say which are most effective at this point.
Good, thank you. Our next question.
Okay. Next question is from Stephen asking, was there any objective measure of secondary trauma, burnout, and coping strategies, or were the statistics only gathered through self-reporting, such as were there any gauge of whether people are experiencing these characteristics but are not actually aware of it?
Well, I think this is a wonderful question because in some of my presentations I've discussed about this issue of your colleagues know that you're burned out before you do. That maybe you're irritable or you're snappy or your work is not up to the level that it was, or you seem upset or anxious. So, of course, these instruments are self-report. This is the tried and true method of tapping, and I think if we were going to use some kind of, in psychiatry, we might use a gold standard of an interview. And I guess if we were in forensic psychiatry, we might use the gold standard of asking other people. But these instruments, self-report instruments, have been around for a while. The ProQual is very well validated. It's been used in thousands of studies. So this is what we have, and we think it's a reliable way to gather this information.
All right. Next question is asking along the same lines. Did your research also ask for what the participants thought were the causes of their secondary trauma and burnout? And if yes, specifically on the findings, were you able to see how much does workplace interaction and deadlines lead to that?
So let me just throw that out to Danielle and Heidi. Is that, or perhaps Jonathan, or to Danielle and Heidi, I think.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're really excited by all the interest in these other job characteristics and demographic characteristics that could be more predictive of secondary trauma. That will be in the publication. It's not part of this PowerPoint today, but we are also very interested in, and we were able to ask in our demographics if people were doing a lot of overtime or if they had a lot of validity testing, things like this. So we can put those into the regression to see how those are reacting to secondary trauma.
Good. And I think again, some of this is workplace specific. So some workplaces may have pressures related to error-free work. Others may have more testimony kinds of pressures. Others may have more workload over pressures, although that seemed to be pretty universal in terms of work overload. So that's a good question, and hopefully our final set of analyses will answer some of that. Another question?
All right, next question is asking, when referring to wellness, you mentioned things like yoga, physical body wellness, and EAP. Were topics such as psychological treatment included in the study? Typically, CSI, the field, deal with the more traumatic incidents, whereas lab, latent print, DNA toxicology are not entrenched in the scene itself and surrounded by the quote-unquote gory elements.
I'm not completely sure what the questioner means by topics such as psychological treatment. I don't think that we ask people specifically if they were in psychological treatment. That's a question that a lot of people don't want to answer in surveys. There's no question that CSI people see a lot of traumatic incidents, whereas lab people may be somewhat more removed, although they may hear stories and have to look at pictures or other descriptions. And of course, as we said, the lab finding, the literature finding reinforced the notion that CSIs were stressed, and that we did find a higher level of secondary trauma in that group. Even though I'm not sure if it emerged statistically significant, it was clearly higher. Anything else about that I didn't cover?
Yeah, I also just wanted to mention that I think this is a very important area of study. Anecdotally, when we went to the facilities, they mentioned that their EAPs will often give services for things like counseling or therapy. There were some facilities that even provide time for that. However, those facilities, the message they felt they were receiving from their employees was that they would rather talk to their peers than talk to a professional. And so I think that we were not able to kind of untangle what services people are using or are interested in, just able to look at the perception of their facilities. So I think that is a future area of interest to try to decide if professional services such as therapy would be useful for the scientists in this context.
Good, thank you. There was an earlier question I see in the list. Did the amount of time as CS, I assume that means CSI, show greater amount or did not show any effect? And I think it's the same issue. I believe we had a question in our about number of cases, right? Is that correct? That people encountered in a time frame?
I'm not actually sure I understand the question.
I mean, we did look at the number of cases that professionals were exposed to in different contexts. 1 to 10, 10 to 20. So it's possible something may pop out. But again, it goes, of course, with what we would expect, which is more exposure would be more effect. But let's go on to the next question.
All right. Next question is asking, were there any results regarding location or states with greater or lower response scores in secondary trauma?
Well, I should preface this question, which is an interesting question because conditions vary quite a bit across the country. We specifically did not list the facilities in this presentation, nor will we list them in a report that we produce to protect their privacy, and we did not make any direct comparisons. But again, going sort of down the further down, I guess there might be a way to pull out of the data elements that, without identifying the location, but elements for some kinds of facilities that seem to be more prominent than others, and whether that was related to the outcome. But we didn't specifically did not want to make any kind of comparisons or endanger the privacy of the various participant agencies. Want to go on?
All right. Next question is from Melanie, is asking, did the study consider anyone who experienced stress having ideations of suicide?
I don't believe that we asked that question. Heidi, is that correct?
Right. Actually, so IRBs are often really protective of questions such as this because we're just asking survey data. So if someone does discuss thoughts of suicide, Typically what you'd want is you'd want to be able to have services available immediately, which was not possible in this case because we were kind of just shooting out these surveys through email. So that was not one of the questions we were able to ask on this survey.
Yes, I mean, the ProQual instrument, which has these three subscales, secondary trauma, burnout, and compassion or job satisfaction. Under the burnout area, we talk, I'm tired, I feel ineffective, I can't concentrate, I'm cynical, but we don't ask about hopelessness. And in the secondary trauma portion of that questionnaire asks about, imagery, or I feel ineffective in the face of trauma. And the satisfaction area are things like, I feel like I'm getting stuff done, I'm learning, I'm growing on my job, these kinds of things. Whether you'd want to distribute something like a PHQ-9, which is a depression screen that's used in general medical practice at a workplace, I think there might be some question about that because if you did have positive results, what would you do about it? It may be more effective for people to see EAPs, and of course, if they're experiencing hopelessness, or if as a supervisor you learn that someone is experiencing hopelessness, to get them to a professional to try to evaluate what that means. So let's go on to the next question.
Start this question off first by just giving a little information to the audience. We do not have the slide deck from today's webinar available to our audience for download. We are recording today's event and we'll be turning it around into our archival should you want to come back and reference today's material. But then this question comes to you regarding that. Do you have a sense of how soon this research will be published?
Well, of course, we're hopeful that we'll be able to submit it to a publication in the next couple of months. And then for those of you who've attempted to publish, sometimes the turnaround can be very fast with little revision needed. Other times it can be slower, but we're certainly hopeful that this could get into some kind of form within the next 6 months. Our next question?
Next question is asking, is getting counseling or coaching utilized to help with wellness or treatment?
I think is that what I understand from that question would be are counseling and coaching elements, and I think they both are. Certainly coaching, particularly peer coaching, and the availability of counseling from EAP. But in between that is this notion of normalizing the ability for people to talk to their peers and their supervisors about the stresses of the work. That kind of normalizing is often quite helpful because people feel isolated on the job with their feelings and struggles. And so the more we can do to help them, just work on this issue in an open way, the better they will feel, and that will certainly increase resilience.
All right.
Next question.
Next question from Michael is asking, along the lines of crime scene personnel, is or has there been any consideration for how increased pay and increased time off can contribute to countering increases in secondary trauma and burnout? Additional time to pursue interests outside of work and the pay to do them could be a way of help.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. One of the facilities that we talked to in specific talked about this whole issue of time off following an extended work on a project or a crime scene. For folks, almost universally, people told us that when you're called to work on a crime scene, it's not an 8-hour-a-day job. It can be 12 hours. It can be 3 days. It can be weeks. Depends on the scene and where you're coming from, and how to compensate. Give people time off or some change maybe in demands, so that they can recharge, because that's clearly, those can be very stressful. In terms of pay, work pay, we didn't look at that issue. And I think in the wellness and employment literature, as I understand it, although pay is important, job satisfaction, relationships with peers and bosses are also very high contributors to job satisfaction. Danielle, do you have any thoughts about that, or Heidi? Okay. You guys can hear me though, right?
Yes, yes, we
Yeah.
can still hear
Okay,
you.
can hear you. Good. Okay, what's the next question?
Next question. Work progress, competency, and deadlines are often instigated by management. Do you have any plans on focusing some study on management and their perception or acceptance of mindfulness practices in forensic scientists? We have attempted to cultivate mindfulness groups in our agency, but has come up against resistance, mostly from management who have never been educated on the benefits of mindfulness training and believe that the results would be too subtle.
Well, again, that's an excellent question because the tension between the work goals, accomplishing work goals in terms of productivity and promoting resiliency in your staff and the time that that takes is often seen as a kind of zero-sum game by management. But a lot of the management that we spoke to were very sensitive to the notion that increasing resiliency among their professionals would redound to the benefit of the organization, to their productivity. And we're hoping that presentations like this and obviously our publication will show that relationship as we showed in that last slide, showing that the more positive perceptions that people had of what their organization was doing, which probably corresponds to what their organization is doing, that it had a direct relationship to lower secondary trauma, lower burnout, and more satisfaction. So I think that answers the question. Heidi or Danielle, do you have any other thoughts about this?
I just wanted to add that culture change is notoriously difficult. So I think what you're seeing is very normal, albeit frustrating. And there is literature out there about ways to improve changing a culture and implementing new interventions. So I think what you're finding, that resistance is very common in when you're trying to start a new culture. And hopefully, like Dr. Levin said, just discussing it more and more will make it a more viable option in facilities.
Thank you.
All right. Next question is from John asking, sworn officers, and we've seen this in other vicarious trauma webinars that we've done in the past with the FTCOE, but sworn officers are typically reluctant to seek clinical help with secondary trauma issues as it may result in a change of duty status, such as firearms removed, etc. Was there a percentage of sworn CSI in the study, and was that considered?
I'm going to turn this over, I think, to Heidi or Danielle. We did ask this question, but my recollection was that the very large majority of the people we surveyed were not sworn. Is that correct? Heidi or Danielle, can you hear me?
So you're correct. Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, I was talking on mute. Yes, we did ask this question, if you were sworn or unsworn, and we are considering it in the regression, as we've heard in other iterations of this presentation, that is something to consider. So that will definitely be included in the final analysis for publication. But yes, the majority for our specific sample were not sworn.
Yes. So we were looking at lab scientists, and not in. It's my understanding that there are facilities where CSIs are not necessarily sworn, although they may be in other facilities. Is that your recollection from our talking to the facilities?
Yes.
Right. And of course, it brings up what Jonathan mentioned about the report, which is that there are services available to sworn officers that should be extended to the non-sworn because often they work side by side in the same department. And then this issue of change in duty status. Yes, I think this is always a fear among sworn personnel that they may lose their firearm or some other related clearance that may be critical to their work. And again, this needs to be a culture change. As a forensic psychiatrist, I examine police officers in terms of are they able to handle a firearm psychologically? Are they safe? And I think we become more sophisticated in understanding that a lot of psychological distress does not put people at risk. Some more serious conditions may, but becoming more sensitive to that is a critical issue in helping sworn personnel. Next question.
Next question is from Rob, and I really think this is a great question. It could really open up the door for a lot of volunteer laboratories and facilities. But is there an intention to revisit this study using a different group of facilities for your data source? Or would the intention be to follow up with the same ones already studied? If the former, is there a means to volunteer your own facility as candidate for participation in the future study?
So I think this is a good question. I think maybe Jonathan could address this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the way I've sort of looked at this initial gap assessment is really to kind of scratch the surface and help inform the research community, help inform NIJ's safety, health, and wellness portfolio, and really be that starting point to start to think about what are these additional research questions to look at. In terms of expansion, I think that's a great idea to try to elicit a wider participation. I believe one of the resources in the link that I mentioned, which is on the FTCOE regarding all the webinars and podcasts and resources in this area, one of the links includes I think it's a position statement or a position paper from ASCLD, really that sort of volunteers the ASCLD practitioner community to engage in these types of research studies. So we know that the willingness is out there, the willing partners exist within the forensic science community, including ASCLD. So I encourage future discussions to consider ideas, and certainly thank you for the folks on the phone asking the questions, for your future participation in new efforts in this area.
All right. Next question is more of a statement with a little bit of an embedded question. I would definitely like to get the subject matter experts take an expertise on this. Our lab has supported health and wellness opportunities such as exercise classes, but many employees weigh workout loads against those opportunities and or their workloads against those opportunities, and it becomes a cost-benefit decision, such as how deep will I bury myself if I take a class now? Their work still must be completed, and many times this is what causes non-participation in programs.
Thank you for that question. This is I need to get home. I need to get out of work, so to get home to take care of my life, and therefore I don't want to set aside, take an hour out of my time. So again, at least to my mind, this is a culture shift issue that workloads need to be rethought in a collaboration between management and frontline people to understand that building resiliency improves performance and improves productivity, and that this when you make it this, you can go if you want, but we're not going to reconfigure what you're doing to make that easier. So I hear what you're saying, and it has come up in many organizations, not just in the forensic world, in terms of organizations where there's vicarious trauma and stress in mental health professionals, for example, as well. Other thoughts, Heidi or Danielle, about this?
Yeah, I agree with you. I understand the pull that the work still needs to be completed. Unfortunately, like Dr. Levin said, we know that things like burnout cause lower quality work, causes less productivity, and dissatisfaction in your job can lead to high turnover rates and people quitting, which then backs up the system as well. And so the cost benefit now becomes, if we reduce your load by a certain number of cases a week, so that 1 hour a week or 1 hour a day, you can do this stress reduction intervention. How does that now benefit us in the long term of productivity and quality of work?
So thank you. I appreciate your input there. But this is again, the challenge in across many different systems, including forensic systems.
Another question is asking, how can facilities establish trust when it comes to answering surveys that are supposedly anonymous? If people trust that surveys are anonymous, then more data obviously or hopefully could be collected.
Well, this is a great question, and it reminds me of my studying attorneys who are, as you would imagine, a somewhat suspicious group. They're very careful about answering questionnaires. And in the study that we did, we got a very large response because management bought into it. Management was already interested in looking at this issue. Management said, we want you to answer surveys. It's being done by an outside group. We emphasize throughout all our materials, our information about the study, and all the descriptions that there's no identifying information of any kind. We don't even know the IP address of the individual. And of course, these things are done online. And there's no place on the survey to record that kind of information. Plus, in working with the IRB at the Department of Justice and other IRBs, we were very careful not to identify groups where there might have been only a small number of respondents, like, 3 people who did latent print at a certain facility. Well, management would know who they were. So we were very careful to also avoid any identifying. So and when we went to the facilities, we talked to managers about that. So it's an excellent question, and it really involves kind of buy-in and great clarity in terms of when you present a survey.
All right, thank you so much for that. We are going to give everyone just a few more minutes to type in any questions that they might have for our panel. While we are waiting on those questions, again, we are recording today's webinar, and we will be converting it into our archival version that should be available by the beginning of next week, should you want to refer back to today's presentation. Also, you can pass along to any colleagues that might have missed today's live event. I'm sure that this will be very helpful to quite a bit of colleagues out there. Also, I want to make mention again, as you see on your screen, the ASCLD Emerging Issues Employee Wellness webinar series is going on. Today is the first webinar in the series. We will have 2 others. Next Thursday, we'll be tackling employee wellness, the Phoenix Police Department's crime lab approach with Jody Wolf. And then Thursday, the 25th, will be the 3rd webinar in the series, Drug Exposures in the Forensic Laboratory, What We Know and What We Can Learn, with Mr. Robert Kirkby. Again, while we are waiting on last questions to come in, I would like to hand the microphone back over to, we'll start with Dr. Levin. Dr. Levin, if you just want to give us a little bit of information about where the program is going in the near future, as well as in the foreseeable future down the road.
Sure. And again, this is a question that Jonathan can also provide some input on. At this point, our immediate mission is to finish some of these more complex data analyses, to submit this for publication in the next couple of months, and hopefully have it out in a journal. And we are hoping to make it open access, so that everyone can see it without any kind of specific journal subscription. And then, following on direction from NIJ and ASCLD in terms of what initiatives they want to continue.
Yeah, and just to dovetail what Andrew has mentioned as well, I would definitely point folks to that needs assessment report. We did publish a recent article on nij.gov, kind of as a follow-up to the needs assessment, to discuss what NIJ has done to address some of the needs that were in that report to Congress. And this issue of stress and vicarious trauma was also noted in that recent article. And I think it's important to note that this topic came up in the personnel section of the report, And the needs assessment also was tasked with conducting a study of the needs and resources associated with academic forensic science programs. And I saw one of the comments, it wasn't a question in this webinar, but it was a comment about making these resources and strategies available to college programs. And I think we touched upon this in the personnel section in regards to preparing the future of the workforce in the forensic sciences and ensuring that the students are well aware of the types of careers that they're considering. And that might help them, divert them to, field experiences or lab experiences or medical examiner corner offices. And also, make that request. I saw one of the comments mentioned about considering rotations. I think it was a 2-year basis between the field and the laboratory and other work. And I think that's something we've heard from the digital forensics community as well. So these are things worth exploring. And I think organizations can start to explore them on their own as well, because as we mentioned before, each jurisdiction, each agency is a little bit different based on the way that they operate. There's state-based systems, city, municipality, county offices, and when you speak about to the medical examiner coroner system, there's various types of jurisdictions and how they operate as well. And so I think taking all of these pieces of information into consideration is extremely helpful for the entire forensic workforce, and as we think through the pipeline of new personnel entering this area.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan and Andrew. We do have another question that came in asking, in your cohort, did any facilities have mandatory mental wellness training for the leaders?
That's another great question, especially in terms of consciousness raising. It's important for leadership to maybe to recognize their own vicarious trauma and burnout, because certainly not confined to people on the front lines. We did not. I don't recall a facility that had specifically identified a program for leadership, but I think that leadership may have facilitated they may have been participated in programs that were available to all. Do you have any other recollection? Heidi and I did the initial visits about that.
Not with leaders. I think one of the facilities did have mental wellness training for their peer mentors, but I don't recall any of the facilities saying that specifically for their administration, and we didn't ask it on the survey.
All right. We do have another comment that came in. This can obviously go to the group. Chris is saying, I think it is great that this topic is being discussed more openly now, but then to get your expertise, but also I am shocked that there are still many agencies that may state they advocate for more support, but do not offer it in more effective ways. Do you have anything that you would like to elaborate on that?
Well, again, I think, I think the overall goal is to raise awareness. And as facilities understand the usefulness of this and maybe its effectiveness, understanding will grow, and the offerings of this kind of support staff will also become more disseminated. Jonathan, do you have a thought about this as well?
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add, but I think what we're gaining from this conversation today, I think, is helpful for the team to hear in terms of, kind of qualifying some of the things that they've seen and heard, both in their discussions with stakeholders and on the ASCLD working group, but then also from kind of the qualitative information I believe that they've gained through this study. This is hopefully going to, continue the conversation, but in some places and jurisdictions, that might be, simply initiating the conversation. I think this consideration of peer support groups and peer mentorships and as mentioned before, training for management is going to be incredibly helpful. I think in some ways, just coming from my own forensic science experiences in my previous jobs, I think the element of having that peer support is really important. And I'm not sure if the entire law enforcement community has that type of constant contact with a team of individuals that operate in the same unit, seeing types of casework that, could be traumatic, and being able to bounce, just discussions off of each other throughout the day or throughout the month or year. I think that type of the ability to have colleagues to lean on, whether they exist within the same agency or in different agencies, I think is incredibly important. I've kind of seen that at various conferences over the last few years as well, is that they're very highly attended presentations on this topic, and I think there's a lot of follow-up conversation that occurs in the hallways, and folks start to identify the folks that they can lean on just to have the discussions outside of the workplace to talk through things. So I think that peer support element is something that's very interesting and something worth investigating, and I hope it as it becomes more of a part of the conversation of the regular workplace environment, we can continue kind of breaking down those walls to avoid any challenges that there might be to mitigating and addressing these issues.
All right. We do have one other question that has come in. Would ASCLD or NIJ, for that matter, consider or possibly making training a requirement for laboratories?
So, of course, Aaron, it'd be great for you to share your thoughts and perspectives from ASCLD about this.
Sure. Well, ASCLD is a professional organization, so we could recommend to people that they consider training, but we are not ASCLD Labs, so we do not, which doesn't exist anymore, that's ANAB, so we can't mandate that anything be required in any agency. But having webinars like this and presentations at the different regional professional organization meetings, that's creating dialogue and making the lab directors and managers consider things like this to bring into their training for new employees or for managers.
Thank you.
All right. One last question from Rob asking, during the study, was an assessment of facility budget toward wellness programs included as a factor?
We didn't ask this on the survey, but it's interesting in some of our discussions. The facilities commented on, we don't have much of a budget for this, so we can do only a limited number of things. And clearly that's another important issue going forward as facilities and the field think about how to address these issues. Aaron, did you have any thoughts about that in terms of what you know from your laboratory leadership?
With respect to funding?
Yes.
Oh gosh, every laboratory is different with respect to where their funding sources come from. We do rely on the NIJ quite a bit for some of our funding as well. So, maybe that's something that ASCLD, NIJ, and our working group could actually work toward finding more, maybe a grant or some sort of other resource financially or something to look into training programs or something similar.
Yeah, and just to add to this too, and I think it might be touched upon in the future webinars in the next couple weeks that are noted in the slide right now. Jurisdictions, I think, are trying to piggyback on the resources that are available to sworn officials and trying to formalize the forensic workforce, whether it's through state legislation or state budgets as well. To make those resources available. So, I mentioned some of the federal resources, both at OVC and through the COPS office. And I think that we've spoken to program managers there, and they certainly think it's important for applicants to consider the non-sworn and forensic staff when they're applying for funding as well. So while NIJ may not have a specific avenue for funding a workshop or a training session, there might be other opportunities to partner with the law enforcement agencies that have a clearer line or a clearer path to apply for the federal funding, or also with the state funding too. And I think it's important to consider all avenues. I don't want to call it specific states, but I know I've heard certain states, making an active effort to include the forensic professionals in the state legislations that apply to mental health and resiliency resources within their communities.
All right, we are at the end of time, so we'll end on this last question. The last question we have that came in is, did you find that CSI or lab personnel or management retire earlier due to secondary trauma and burnout? Are there established programs for CSI, laboratory personnel, laboratory management, early retirement similar to what is offered to sworn officers?
So this is a great question. We didn't gather any data about this. I don't know if Aaron or Jonathan can shed any light on this, either anecdotally or programmatically.
I don't have any an answer to that, but a lot of these questions, including this one, that's a lot of food for thought in terms of maybe some future research or questions that we could have towards the profession.
Good, and I think sort of what's embedded in the question is also this notion that sworn personnel have a number of programs that may not be available to unsworn, and maybe this is another area of exploration or understanding.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, we are going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Again, our first webinar in the ASCLD Emerging Issues Employee Wellness webinar series. Obviously, we would like to thank all of our presenters and collaborators today, Ms. Erin Forey, Dr. Jonathan McGrath, Dr. Andrew Levin, Ms. Danielle Crimmins, and Ms. Heidi. We are going to go ahead and end today's presentation. Again, thank you all presenters for joining us today, the countless hours of research that you've put into this. We had such tremendous feedback and interaction from the audience. I will definitely be passing all of your comments along to our presenters, but we just want to make sure that we thank all of our attendees that have joined us for today's webinar. These webinars are simply not possible without your attendance and your support, so we greatly appreciate everyone being here today. Before you do leave today's webinar, we always ask that you participate in our short survey. You will find the link there at the bottom right-hand corner below the closed captions. It simply says survey. Once you click on that, a new window will open, and it will take you directly to our survey where you can give us your feedback that we always find is vital information we use to make sure that we are providing you with the best webinar experience possible, as well as to adjust the content and way we disseminate that information out to your audience. So if you could take a few moments to complete that, we would definitely appreciate it. Again, we do have Jonathan McGrath's slide decks that were presented at the very beginning available for download. You can find those back on the main webinar page when you first came into the event. So make sure that you do download that. It was full of informational links as well as his direct contact information should you want to reach out for any follow-up. You will also see coming in the chat pod momentarily from Tyler links that will go to our social media outlets such as Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as our website and our podcast. We will also be putting a link in there that will take you directly to the ASCLD Emerging Issues Employee Wellness webinar series. That way you can register for the next two webinars that will be taking place on the following Thursdays of this month. Again, we want to thank all of our presenters, all of our subject matter experts, everyone from ASCLD and NIJ for their presentations and time today. Please take a few moments to complete the survey before you leave. And we just want to make sure that you know we are constantly adding new material and content to our website in the forms of webinars, reports, success stories. So make sure that you go onto our website to find all of our forensic applications and information that we are disseminating out to you, the forensic community. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, and we will see you in next week's webinar, Tackling Employee Wellness, the Phoenix Police Department's Crime Lab Approach. We hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.